engagement on the strategy development. So we confirmed our intent to conduct public input survey in the fall on the draft strategy to outreach to vulnerable populations and look to the Roundtable membership to support those linkages and distribution. And then we're also working on goal 2, which is a brainstorm of the opportunities and our actions to coordinate our efforts. So this will be completed in the summer and discussed with the Roundtable in the fall. Oh, you're on mute, Carrie-Ann.
Thank you, classic. Thanks very much, Janine. And you may have heard while Janine was providing that update, recording in progress. And so this is a new initiative that we've started with this meeting, is to start recording each of the Roundtable meetings while we're in the plenary session. And those will be posted following the meeting. So just wanted to note that Dana had sent an email in advance to alert everyone, but wanted to note it at the start of the meeting as well. So that everyone's aware, and the terms of reference were updated to reflect that, and those were sent around before the meeting. So next, I wanted to provide a brief Airshed Roundtable update on the process. So this chart you've seen in the past, it's a quick overview, high-level overview of the whole process over 3 years that was put together at the outset of the project process. And if we reflect on year 1, so the intention of year 1 was these 3 big boxes that are on your screen. And what we've got on the right is some of the key outcomes that we went through during year 1. And so we had the formation of the steering committee and the Roundtable, which each had several meetings throughout the year. There was a communication strategy completed, and there are plans to implement further and broader public communication as we move into year 2. There was a state of the air memo that was developed back in the fall, and that was distributed to the Roundtable, as well as made publicly available. And then the bulk of our work with the Roundtable over the past few months has been to draft that strategy, vision, goals, and guiding principles. And those were all developed through the input at the meetings, as well as the survey, and with further confirmation and review with the steering committee. And then the final piece of work was around planning for working groups, which were launched in May of this year. And all of this is captured in the year 1 report, which was brought forward to the CBRD board at the end of May. And that report is also available. So that's a quick highlight of everything we went through in year 1. Now, if we look towards year 2, which is where we're at now, we've got the 3 main core boxes that were originally outlined. We've added a couple of extra boxes as we adjust and update the process as we move through it. And I will just speak about each of those on the next slide here. So the core focus for year 2 is to complete the strategy. So that has already begun with the vision and goals and guiding principles being drafted. And now currently in progress are the working groups, which you'll hear more about during this session. And those working groups will be completing their recommendations on the proposed strategies and actions. The steering committee is also, as Janine had mentioned, completing recommendations on their proposed strategies and actions for goal 2 area. And all of these pieces will be brought together to the Roundtable for further review in September. So as we had mentioned, the draft vision and goals and guiding principles have all been pulled together to date, and the actions and strategies are currently in progress. And then the next step is to really pull those all together and reflect on whether we've captured everything. And the Roundtable has one more chance for input on all of those pieces to combine before we go out to a public survey on those draft pieces. And then once we've gone through that whole process, we will look to finalize the strategy. At the same time, there will be additional communication, coordination, and public outreach happening. And that includes launching the CVRD Connect website that will be specifically around the Roundtable events and the Airshed, an avenue to distribute information about the process. And we will continue to share the documents and meeting presentations and outcomes with the Roundtable via the sync the sync file sharing mechanism. And at the same time, we will be beginning implementation of select initiatives. So there will be a little bit of a parallel process where we're completing the strategy and beginning the implementation of some initiatives at the same time. So that's an overview of the plan, an update on the process to date. And now I think I'm going to hand it over to Dana.
Thanks, Cariad. So we did have one message in the chat around the steering committee, but I'm not sure if we have time to speak to the chat just now or if we're going to go through. But Carrie, I just wanted to let you know that there's a message in there. So the next part of the meeting is we get to share with you all the good work that's happened since the last roundtable. We formed 3 working groups, which I emailed all of you about, and lots of you have offered to join these working groups. So thank you so much to all the work that's gone in so far. We have already met 2 times with 3 different groups. So I think 6 meetings in total. And that's what we're going to do the bulk of today. We're going to let you know what was said, and we're also going to let you know, give you a chance to give feedback. So as we go, please feel free, use the chat, ask questions, and we'll get to them once we have time. And if not, we can always follow up later. Comments as well, know that they'll be brought forward throughout the process of the working group. So working group overview. Based on our draft goals, which we came up with all of you, we formed 3 working groups around the first overarching goal, which is to achieve measurable reductions in fine particulate matter levels. And then there were sub goals related to that, and those were really what the 3 working groups revolved around. So the first working group, they're working on the goal to reduce emissions from existing residential wood burning appliances. The second working group is around transitioning away from biomass space heating systems. And the third working group has 2 sub-goals related to open burning. The first sub-goal is to eliminate burning of yard waste in residential neighborhoods. And the second sub-goal is to promote and advocate for alternatives to open burning outside of residential neighborhoods. So that is the scope of work being complete, the scope of work that will be presented to you today. And in terms of the process, like I said, we have met twice with really the purpose to work. The first meetings are the purpose is to work together to develop preliminary recommended actions to meet the identified goal. And then right now we're presenting those preliminary actions and getting some feedback. And then we're going to have a third working group to review and refine actions based on this feedback and identify implementation steps. So we're really starting to act to achieve these goals. Next slide, Carrie. And one of the work of these working groups, the first meeting, we discussed challenges to meet these goals. And some overarching challenges emerged, which are on the screen for you here. And the first overarching challenge we found was awareness. So there's a lack of awareness of health impacts of wood smoke and of the links between wood smoke and climate change. And this includes battling some misinformation that's out there online and within the community related to wood smoke and health. Another challenge is acceptance. There's a strong cultural practice of burning, and that can be difficult to change. The third challenge is access. So there can be a lack of access to or knowledge of alternatives to particularly wood stoves and heating systems. There's an economic challenge as well, which is that it's expensive to switch heating systems, and also that the cost of health impacts aren't counted in this overall holistic equation of air quality. there is the challenge, regulatory challenges, that, you know, the regulatory landscape with all the different municipalities is complex and unclear. There's unclear authority or resource intensive to enforce. So this just relates to air quality in general. It can be a difficult regulatory landscape to work in. And then the final one relates to data. So there are limits on data about geographic variation in pollution levels over time in the region, with just one permanent monitoring station. And there's also a lack of data out there on the types of wood stoves that are being used and the number that are being used. So if we're going to achieve our goals, this data is important to be able to measurably show that we're moving forward in the right direction. And at this time, I will pass it over to Tarek, who is going to cover the first two working groups context and the first working group overview. And then just so you know, Janine from the city of Fort Meade will be doing the second one, and Pete will be doing open burning from the province. So over to you, Tarek.
Thank you, Jenna. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, my voice is a bit dry. So to provide some context on behind the work that we've been doing in groups 1 and 2, and that is focusing on the wood burning appliances. One group is to reduce emissions from existing appliances. The second group is to find alternatives to existing wood burning for heating, home heating. So to provide some context, back in 2018, the CVRD has done a home heating survey and has found that 38% of respondents use wood stoves, and 75% of those who use wood stoves stated that they would like to change their heating sources. Wood smoke in the Comox Valley, mainly from space heating and open burning, remains the main source of fine particulate matter, which we call PM2.5. And to this day, we still have recurring episodes of poor air quality in the Comox Valley during the cold season. And that is due to the combination of factors of that we have more wood burning, mainly for space heating, and also we have less venting. The venting conditions tend to be poor in the winter. So these conditions come together to create poor air quality in the Comox Valley during the cold season. Also on the education and incentives that are existing to date, the CVRD has a wood smoke reduction program, which includes lots of educational videos, print materials, and also radio material. Local nonprofit groups also provide good information through their newsletters and online events. Also, we have existing provincial programs with also local governments provide local top-ups that provide incentives to replace old stoves and upgrade mainly to heat pumps. And these programs provincially, namely, are the Wood Stove Exchange Program, and also the incentives through BC, through Clean BC. On the regulation side, we have the solid fuel burning domestic appliance regulation, which requires that only certified wood stoves would be sold in BC, and that covers the new sales of wood stoves and wood stove appliances in BC. Also, in the Comox Valley, we have local municipal bylaws that do not allow the wood stoves to be installed in new construction. Next slide, please. To provide also a bit of update on what we have identified so far from working group 1 in terms of opportunities. On the data side of things, we have identified the opportunity to collect data on the number of wood stoves that are operating and the type of wood stoves that we have in the Comox Valley, with specific information such as the brand is certified, whether it's certified or not, the year that it's manufactured, and also data on decommissioned wood stoves. This data would provide a really good basis for us to gauge our progress over time in terms of exchanging wood stoves, and also in terms of identifying areas where we have emissions from existing wood stoves. On the education side of things, we develop opportunities to develop outreach strategy to community health, to communicate the health impacts of wood smoke, and also to develop effective strategies to support the clean burning education piece. On the regulatory side of things, we identified opportunities to develop local bylaws to, sorry, I can't read. Local bylaws to ban the burning during times of poor air quality, which is already being implemented in other jurisdictions. And there's a prime opportunity here to provide, to do a similar program in the Comox Valley. Another opportunity is to develop opacity regulations, which folks can lodge any complaints when the smoke is thick based on certain opacity readings. And another opportunity is to explore local bylaw options for regulating the wood supply in the Comox Valley to provide basically clean and dried wood, which would tremendously reduce the emissions of smoke from wood burning. And also, lastly but not least, there's an opportunity to require that all wood stoves that have an operating permit in the Comox Valley. That's it from me. And passing it on to Janine, I believe.
Thanks, Tarek.
Sorry, Janine, it's Ariad here. Just to jump in for a moment, are there any questions to clarify anything that Tarek presented about working group 1? If not, we can continue with Janine and then circle back, but just wanted to put that out there. If there is anything anybody wants
to clarify, are we going to, sorry, don't have my video on. Are we going to have a chance for feedback on this after the end of all 3 presentations? Is that the idea? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So just wanted to, if there was anything that was unclear or you weren't sure about, just an opportunity to clarify that now. And then we'll have a full roundtable of input after the 3 presentations.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's continue, Janine.
Thanks. Just need the next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So in working group 2, we were focusing on transitioning away from biomass space heating systems. So our goal, we had reframed a little bit. We previously had the wording in residential neighborhoods as a way of identifying our goal, but we've decided, or we're proposing that we shift more to focus on space heating systems in general without specifying that residential neighborhoods piece. Some of the opportunities we identified in this working group, from a data perspective, we see the same opportunity as working group 1. So collecting data on a number of wood stoves operating, the type of wood stoves, including brand, if they're certified, year manufactured, and any decommissioned wood stoves. On the education side, there's an opportunity to develop an outreach strategy to communicate the health impacts of wood smoke. Again, we share that with working group number 1, and provide information on space heating options, including emissions, costs, and focusing on heat pumps as a clean alternative. Other opportunities we identified, some incentives would be to target lower income homes and add new incentives to remove or decommission wood stoves without the requirement to buy. And then on the regulatory side, there's the opportunity to develop local bylaws to phase out wood stoves, focusing on populated areas where residences are closer together. And there's some details to be worked out there because there's some residential zones within municipal boundaries and some residential neighborhoods within the electoral areas. And that was everything from the second working group.
Thanks, Janine. Again, I'll put it out there if there's any clarifying questions on what Janine has put forward so far. Okay. I will then ask Pete to speak to the third working group.
Okay, thanks, Carrie-Ann. So a snapshot overview, as was mentioned, we've had a couple of meetings, so 3 hours. As it pertains to yard waste or backyard burning in residential areas. So we know that this occurs in closer to where people live, and that likely equals higher exposure to PM 2.5. Even though it is a smaller portion of what the annual emissions are in the regional district. Anyone who participates in backyard burning is required to use the open burning smoke control reg, to abide by the open burning smoke control reg, which is a provincial regulation. And just to note, that regulation is new in 2019 and had quite a bit of upgrades put into it that were aimed at cleaning up air quality, and burning is actually more restrictive in the province now than it was just a few years ago. So we need to acknowledge what's been done, I think, as well. Municipalities and regional districts do have the ability to adopt their own smoke control bylaws. But there's a couple of challenges associated with that. The big one is enforcement, and that can be quite challenging for a local government. If you're going to have a bylaw, you do need to be able to enforce it. And the other piece to that is that if a local government does want to adopt a smoke control or air quality bylaw, it has to be more restrictive. I don't know if that's the right word, than the open burning smoke control reg. So the idea is we don't want to be moving backwards here. Currently, right now, Courtenay, Comox, and Cumberland, they have bylaws, but their bylaws are more associated with fire safety than they are with air quality. But we are seeing some alignment between fire safety and air quality, and we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. Moving over to burning that is occurring, generally speaking, outside of residential areas, and this is more of the industrial burning. So generally speaking, it does occur away from where people live, work, and play, generally speaking. It does amount to a larger portion of the annual 2.5 that's being released into the regional district. But what are the implications of that? Even though it's a larger portion, it's important to know that these forest companies are required to abide by obscure. And as it pertains to the two largest forest companies operating within the regional district, that would be Mosaic and Hancock. They have also signed on to the West Coast Fuel Smoke Management Plan. So anybody that is involved in industrial operations, harvesting, and they create roadside piles is what people are probably most familiar with. They have a statutory obligation under the wildfire regulation to abate those piles. And the use of open fire is the cheapest and most economical way to do it. But they are quite heavily regulated under the obscure, so they have to abide by the obscure. Plus, there is best management practices in that plan, the fuel smoke plan, that they also agreed to abide by. Examples, only so many piles can be burnt in any given airshed on a given day, custom venting forecasts, things along those lines. So those are your larger operators. We have smaller operators, woodlots. Their burn programs are a little bit easier for them to manage. They're generally burning somewhere between 5 and 15 piles a year. Still required to abide by the open burning smoke control reg, but a little easier for them to manage. They can wait for that perfect day and get rid of their, generally low number of piles on that perfect day. Land clearing, land development, agriculture, also they on a smaller scale will also be involved in bigger industrial burning. A little more challenging. Oftentimes that is tighter into where people people live, work, and play. They may not be as familiar with the wildfire regulation or with the open burning smoke control reg. And so that is an area where we could probably make improvements in terms of educating and also finding ways for them to abate their hazard without using fire. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about residential neighborhoods, backyard burning, and the yard waste associated with it, some of the opportunities that have been identified are in and around education, communicating the impacts of backyard burning. So, you know, that can be mail outs, neighbor to neighbor discussions. The regional district website, they alluded to their webpage that's coming. Information can be provided there, and in and around composting, chipping, things like that, alternatives to open burning. One thing that I wanted to spend a tiny bit more time on is currently there is a program that has either fire departments or contractors going around chipping people's backyard waste and then removing that from their property. So this is a program that I think has real potential, and it is being funded right now through BC Wildfire and through the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. However, through this working group, through the Roundtable, it's being referenced more for its ability to contribute to clean air than fire safety. So this is something that Tarek and I noted, and we've had a discussion, exchanged some emails. Tarek has had internal discussions with his people, and to let Tarek know, I've had internal discussions with my people too. There's real potential to move this one forward, and this could be a real winner in terms of removing the need for people to burn backyard waste. And it could be a real contributor to cleaning up air in residential neighborhoods from backyard burning. So more to come on that, early stages. And then another thing that was discussed was an exchange program, having somebody come by, do your chipping in return for compost, things like that. Right now within the CVRD, in terms of regulation, a full bylaw review is being conducted, and just looking for alignment across the region in different municipalities, that type of a thing. So that is occurring right now. And looking for ways to advocate to the province and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities for continued funding for this chipping program. So it's interesting for me, and it's been learnable for me to hear to the funding that is currently being used for this program as unstable. And I think that's rather interesting, because there is certainly a lot of political will and mandate right now as it pertains to fire safety to keep that program going. But I think that this roundtable and all of the associated, steering committee and working groups have highlighted ways to try and, advocate for making it permanent. And so, that work is started and is ongoing. Next slide, please. So in terms of open burning outside of residential neighborhoods, so the industrial burning, as I've mentioned, a lot has been done already. So here again, I think it's important to acknowledge what has been done with especially the major players, Hancock and Mosaic. Currently, they are already burning much less than they did even 5 years ago. The amount of piles they burn in any given year is probably half of what they did. That's due to utilization. They also employ other methods for abating their hazard when they're in tight. They'll try chipping and firewood, for the public and things along those lines. But one of the things that was brought up on our last meeting, and we didn't have time to flesh it out, and I'm looking forward to our next working group meeting to do more on this, was to develop a toolkit for local governments and to provide them with information and different avenues that they can advocate more strongly with provincial governments around utilization of fiber. And, you know, there is a lot going on right now in this department, but I think getting local government involved more in listening to, you know, all the things that are coming out of this roundtable is potentially a missing piece here. So this toolkit is something that is going to be developed more, and we're going to be looking into the details of it more, because the things that go into it have to be pragmatic and they have to be meaningful. And yeah, I see Megan is talking about policy and recommendations to the UBCM and things along those lines. And I look forward to hearing much more about that moving forward. I think there's merit in this. And it ties into the regulatory side of things as well, as it pertains to local bylaws and things like that. So I think I'll cut it there. I probably hit my 10 minutes already, and I need to watch it, or Dana's going to give me the hook. So
Thanks, Pete.
Great.
And I'll pass it over to Alana to respond.
Thanks, Dana. Sorry, you just all caught me chewing the last bit of my sandwich. I just a little bit further to Pete's comment about the work that the CBRD is doing right now. Like many of you, we often struggle with being able to really clearly answer what's in, what's out, and where. And so staff in our bylaw compliance group right now are compiling all the bylaws that we have that pertain to indoor burning as well as outdoor burning. So that's bylaws within the CBRD that we enforce, and then bylaws within each of the municipalities. And really what we're doing is just sort of doing a lay of the land, right? Like, so that we're all clear, we all have the same understanding of what is, what's permitted right now and what's not permitted. And then I would suggest the next step would be for any one of those municipalities or for the CBRD to undertake a fulsome review, which in my world means that we would be looking at a range of options. We'd be doing some public outreach to see, you know, what values have. Now, you know, given this project, we'd be looking to the roundtable for feedback. So just a bit of a qualifier on that language. And you might have already guessed I'm a bit of a word nerd because of that definition I stuck in the chat box. So our definitions, Pete, of review might just be a little bit different. We're just at this point taking a lay of the land look. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alana, for that clarification on what CBRD is doing, and also to all the comments coming through in the chat. That's really wonderful to see that the additional input coming through. And so now we'd like to take some time to go around, do a full roundtable opportunity for everyone to express any initial thoughts. And I think we've got enough time that we can do a full roundtable about the wood stove topic, followed by a full roundtable about the open burning topic. So we've sort of got the two big topics. There are two working groups working on that first topic, but I think we can discuss them both through one roundtable input on that way. And so I will just move ahead to, there we go. We've got a little slide here to help guide us on our way around the roundtable. We've put everyone's names onto the PowerPoint up on the slide, and hopefully I've got a fairly updated list. This is based on the RSVP, so we can just adjust as we need to going through. But what I'd like to do is offer that each person, as we go around the roundtable, have an opportunity to ask questions or to share their feedback on that initial, the initial presentations from the steering committee members on each of the working groups. And we ask that you keep your time to 90 seconds, just so that we can give everyone an equal amount of time to share some responses. Of course, we still invite additional feedback beyond that 90 seconds through written input in the chat, and also following up with us following the meeting. But that will just give an opportunity for everyone to have their say. And so what I'd like to do is invite, we'll start over on.
Before you go, Carrie, I've actually in the background have an updated list of who's in the room. So I'm happy to share my screen if you wanted to have the,
Okay,
we don't have
great.
to go through the silence of who isn't who couldn't make it.
That's great. Perfect. Thanks, Dana.
So can everyone see my screen there?
Yes.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. But yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Carrie. To facilitate.
Okay, that's great. And so I'll start up in the top left corner. We've got Larry tagged as first. Larry, are you interested in sharing any feedback or thoughts on the wood stove input so far?
Yes, I would. As far as the wood stove part of it's concerned, just so everybody knows, I do have a portion of my dwelling is heated with wood stoves, compliance with all the latest information and regulatory things that are required and burns clean. One of the biggest problems that I know and talking to other people is access to good quality dry wood. And anybody that does use a wood stove knows that that is probably the most important thing, is to have access to it and make sure that it's dry. The other thing is education. I really don't believe that people that are using wood stoves are properly educated. I know there are people in the community that I've seen that obviously are burning horrible green wood because it smokes up the whole neighborhood just from one stove. So education and better access, and hopefully we can, through the whole group of us here, we can find ways to have the government cut some of the regulation that stops individuals from accessing wood that is good quality and dry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Larry. And next I'll move to Daniel.
I think Larry hit pretty much everything I was going to say there too. I too am a wood stove user. I heat my whole house with wood. I do my best. Well, I do have a good source of clean, dry wood. And during the winter, I notice little, if any, smoke coming out of my stove compared to some of my neighbors. But yeah, just being able to educate and ensure people have access to this clean, dry wood if they are continuing to use wood stoves is important, and they have the newer up-to-date wood stove models, because you're never going to be able to convince everybody to move away from wood heat. I personally would never move away from wood heat. It's the cheapest source of heat I have access to where I live, and yeah, it wouldn't work with my older model home. Trying to fire in a heat pump, the cost would be prohibitive for me. So
great, thank you, Daniel. And next I will go to Tracy.
I'm going to pass. I got in late at the very tail end of the conversation before the roundtable, so I'll pass.
I'll come back to you at the very end just in case you have something else you want to add for wood stoves. Kevin.
Hi, just two comments. One, there was a really neat mechanism brought up in our working group about the fact that when you have change of use, you can already ban wood stoves during that time. And I thought that was a really neat little piece of, a tool that's already there. The second one, just perhaps my opinion, on the challenges, we clearly have HPCA as a challenge when they've come up with their own plan, which is just more burning. And it's going to be a challenge for this whole roundtable. And I think it's worth listing. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Karen.
Hi, everybody. I don't actually have anything to add. I think the working groups have done a pretty good job at figuring out their task at hand. I know we had very fulsome conversations, so kudos to everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Diane.
Hi, everybody. I think mostly, especially the banning of the wood stoves and such, is something that is more urban as opposed to rural. And as I represent the Mid-Island Farmers Institute, we are mostly a rural bunch where we don't have access to natural gas. And as I think I stated in the very first meeting, that heat pumps are not always the way to go with our weather here. They're not always economical or advantageous with regards to heating a home. So, you know, I get confused, and I think it would be beneficial to add like that we are mostly looking at urban areas as opposed to the rural areas where there's not much of a choice into heating your home, or unless you want to be prohibitive and have electric everywhere. And I don't think anybody wants that. But with regards to the open burning, I think we really need to start educating people with regards to what it does and other alternative uses. So I like the working group, what they've come up with on that.
And I'll just, oh, great, thanks. I'll just say that we will have another round for the open
That's
burning
fine.
specifically,
Done.
but thanks for that note. Okay, great. Okay, and Jamie.
Yeah, just a quick little note. Sorry for being late today. I was doing over in Denman and got stuck on the ferries. But in the last 2 weeks at our shop here, we've pulled out 15 uncertified old wood stoves right from the Comox Valley. Half them we put in gas units, and the other half we put in brand new wood stoves out in like rural districts where people do burn a lot. So we're noticing a lot more people are trying to really change how they burn. Some people we've recommended, you know, they shouldn't burn. And so we switched them over to gas or propane if they don't have natural gas there too as well. So just really helping people understand that there are some people who shouldn't burn. There's some places that shouldn't be burnt. And just really focusing on the education, letting people know that the stove they have that they bought in 1995 is no longer top-notch stove. And there are options out there besides wood burning too as well if they live in one of those really bad trouble areas that you maybe know now is not the time to burn anymore. So just really working on that education with people here on a local level is really key.
Thanks, Jamie. Catherine.
Thank you. I think one of the most powerful things that came out of my working group, from my own opinion, was just the idea of having all the wood stoves in the Comox Valley registered. So we have a baseline of data, and it also gives us an opportunity to meet with those people who are burners and give them some more information and help with the education piece, which so many people recognize as being so important. Like the 90-second crunch is hard. There's one other important thing I want to say. Oh, and I think a complaint mechanism for people in those really concentrated areas where their neighbors are really impacting their quality of life is so important. From so many people I've heard from, setting something up within it with a system for that, with a way of measuring it, such as visibility, is another, I think, really powerful tool, again, for education as well, to help people understand what good burning looks like. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And no one's exceeded their 90 seconds so far, so great, thanks, Catherine. Let's continue with Christy. Did I catch Christy? Not ready? I'll circle back, Christy, and I'll continue to James.
Yeah, hello. I would say probably the education aspect of it. There's a lot of people that have been burning wood in wood stoves. Like Jamie says, it's been the same high-tech wood stove dated 1990 or what have you, and it's just no longer acceptable. And so that education aspect of it is vitally important. As Larry said too, having access to dry fuel would be another challenge as well. But it's good to see that all of these things are being discussed and recognized as being challenges. That's it.
Thanks, James. And Janelle.
Yeah, hi. My internet is a bit flaky, so I hope I don't break up. I want to echo what Diane said about the rural-urban kind of differences. That definitely came up in our group as well. And I mean, and I'm on the transitioning people away from biomass in residential areas. And I'm really heartened to hear Jamie Payne talk about actually an industry person promoting that, because I think that's really important, because that's not happening in other ways. But I think we also need to keep in mind that even the best new stoves, there was a really damning report, and maybe we can get it uploaded to the resources folder on our shared folder. NESCOM is what it is called for short, and it was a number of our quality agencies in the States that basically did their own research and found out that the whole EPA certification process is just so flawed that there's no guarantee that the stove, that the new stove that's actually going in is that much better than the old stove that's coming out. And not to mention that we all know that people never burn according to factory standards. So putting too much emphasis, especially in more populated areas, on new stoves or better burning education as being the way to go to reduce particulate matter. It's just, I mean, there's been better burning education. I first heard about it when I lived in the Yukon in the 80s. You know, it's been decades, so it's not working that well. So as solution, it's I think what's changing people's behavior more is the health stuff, and I really echo that. So I think, yeah, that just keep in mind that new stoves are not a solution, particularly in more urban or more denser areas, that we probably need rural versus urban solutions, because rural people do face, you know, more power outages. I recognize it, and rural by meaning large lots, so you're not as impacting your neighbors. And that'd be one way for the strategy to be more successful. But
Janelle,
I think there's also
I'm gonna have to
okay, I knew you would
jump in there. Thank you very much. Yeah. And I'll move over to Megan.
I would add as feedback for the wood stove portion of this, and it's not the group that I was in, just the ongoing interest I have to see the climate change or climate impacts lens be part of the analysis that's occurring. So and I understand that the lane that we're working within is the air quality lane, but the correlation between that and CO2 or carbon emissions in general, there's some correlations there that can help, may strengthen in many cases the argument towards shifting our fuel use, but also to be able to look at this in a larger context of the choices around home heating and home cooling for that matter, which is super relevant in the next few days here, that we're looking at this through a singular lens. And I think always cumulative impacts is the way to approach this work. And if there's a way to insert the information or the variables related to the carbon emissions or CO2 emissions from different fuel sources, and to layer that in and to be looking at it instead of wood burning and other, to be looking at the spectrum of impact, including those that are contributing to climate change. So that's the one you're kind of going to always hear me insert that, because I have a hard time looking at these things in isolation from their other impacts, which are contributing to global warming and extreme weather events that can drive us into either end of the spectrum when it comes to a need for heating or cooling. So I struggle with doing this in isolation from a climate change lens, but I'm willing to. That's why I'm here, but I will always say, why are we not using the climate change lens to talk about this? Why are we narrowing in on just, because you need to have a box to do your work in, but there's a very big, large, relevant box we also need to be looking at in this work.
Great, thanks, Megan. And Ella.
Hello. Yeah, so nothing really too much to provide, just kind of to reiterate what everyone really has been saying about education being the main piece we need to focus on the health impacts of PM 2.5, and just for the community to really understand what those are. Other than that, I think the working groups did provide some pretty good points and feedback with moving towards just cleaner air in the CVRD. So yeah, nothing else to add.
Great, thanks, Ella. And oh, we got a lost spot. Helen.
Hi, everyone. In terms of a personal choice, I have a wood burning fireplace in the background that's going to be decommissioned, because I'm very grateful to the CVRD, their incentive program for heat pumps, and I'm benefiting from it right now in terms of a very cool home and to be in. And so I too come from a health perspective. The reason for decommissioning this, and I haven't used it in 4 years, is because of the health impacts of PM 2.5. And I have deep concerns, having cared at the bedside for people who have COPD, for children who come through emergency rooms with asthma, and a deep-seated concern from our group, the Comox Valley Nurses for Health and the Environment, for climate change. And I echo the concerns that Megan has expressed. So I think that some of these things are absolutely avoidable. And so we should be looking at that, is what can we avoid in terms of impacts that would increase our greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions. So maybe this is the broader lens of the 4 pillars of the CVRD, the climate lens. I would really like to see that also integrated in here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Helen. And Nancy.
Yeah, I sat on this working group, so I don't really have too much more to add. It's really nice to see how all the ideas and thoughts kind of came together in such a nice summary. So I'm glad we were able to do that, and that's, I think, nothing more to add.
Thanks, Nancy. And I'll just circle back to Tracy. Is there anything you wanted to speak about on the wood stove front?
Oh, no. I appreciated all the other comments. Definitely my views align with many of the others here. And I also want to say that it is really great to hear from industry that people are making better choices, and also that industry is providing good feedback to them, not just going in and replacing, suggesting, replacing with a wood stove, but using their knowledge of the area to discourage them and maybe move them towards something else. So that's encouraging.
Great. Thanks everyone for your input. Now what we have up on the screen are all the roundtable members, and we haven't opened it up to the steering committee yet. Is there anyone on the steering committee that would like to respond or provide further context on any of the items that have been brought up to date?
Do you want it in chat? Do you want it in chat?
Sorry, no, I was just wondering if anyone from the steering committee wanted to provide any context. I actually might ask Eric. I know you had noted about climate change and the link between PM 2.5 and climate change. I wonder if you might take a moment to just give a little bit of info on that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. Well, I think a number of people on the roundtable did a very good job of reminding us of this broader context. We don't get very far if we deal with residential wood smoke and we shift PM 2.5 from a wintertime residential problem to a global problem and a summertime problem. So obviously increased forest fires either locally or far away can import PM 2.5. And we've certainly seen that with increasing frequency over the last couple of years, and many of you have experienced yourself. So I would encourage us to, while the focus is on the immediate short-term goals, not to replace one problem with another one. Not that we at this table are responsible for global warming entirely, but anything we can do to help mitigate that is good. The other thing I would say is that there are other air quality parameters, and the more we can do to reduce those, it also gives us more room to deal with some of the others. So PM 2.5 is certainly first and foremost in our mind here, but anything we can do to lower the baseline across the board is also helpful from a health perspective.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. Any other steering committee member that wanted to make any further comments at this point on the wood stove piece? I don't see any unmuting. Okay, great. This is a good chance to take a little break. We'll take a short little break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the same roundtable round of comments. And next time we'll focus on the open burning piece that Pete had presented to us. And there are the two aspects to the open burning. There's the residential backyard burning piece, and then there's also the outside of the residential areas, sort of the land clearing and forestry pieces. So I'll leave that in your mind to think about, and we'll take a short break and come back, let's say before 2:10. We'll get rolling right at 2:10. So we've got 9 minutes. And we'll see you all then. Thank you. In order to follow the same process. So I will start with Larry.
Okay, I made a few notes on the working group that was looking after the open burn. I think they touched some very valid points and some good information and good directions that they want to go. Open burning, just out of curiosity, I've made several trips around the Comox Valley once every 2 or 3 weeks, just taking pictures of people, backyard, open burning. The number of photographs and notes that I make, it just astounded me that there was so much more going on. So I think, having a little bit more control over open burning in residential areas is something that should be very strong. Land clearing, and somebody may want to take notes of this if they want to. I did look at one particular burn pile late last fall. I measured it all out, length, height, width. It's equal to about 268 cords of wood were in that one burn pile. For land clearing, that's the equivalent of roughly 90 homes burning 3 cords of green wood a year. That was just staggering numbers for me. So anyways, I think the chipping program is would be a real strong way to go. I've seen it done in the Parksville area, and it's a good way to reuse some of that waste wood. Anyways, that's all. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Larry. Daniel.
I think Pete in his summary of the working group covered everything pretty well there. Industry has been reducing the amount of wood burned a lot in the past couple of years for a couple of reasons. Due to technology advances, we're getting more recovery out of our harvest volumes, more markets. If a piece of wood is sellable and we can make $1 off of it, we're going to. That's a no-brainer. And the fact that the new OBSCR regulations are very strict, and those are new as well. And we're only out there in the woods, we're only burning October, November, 2 months of the year, and during those 2 months we're burning on very few days, especially close to the town. For example, my company, we had in 2019 we had 3 days of burning, and 2020 we only burned for 1 day. So it's I don't think it's as much as people think it is going on out there.
Thanks, Daniel. And that's specifically the one company. I'll just note that you're representing. Great, thanks. Tracy.
I missed that presentation, but given that I was part of the working group, I can comment a little bit on it. One of the comments that was made, I think it was Jen made the comment, was just about how much easier it would be to enforce if there was an outright ban. I'm always kind of hesitant with the idea of implementing a full ban on something, but in this case I do agree. I think it is much easier to enforce, and I'm talking about backyard burning, not industrial burning, but just the backyard stuff of just saying there's no backyard burning, and then it's very clear if somebody's breaking the rules or not. I mean, I've thought about, what if we educated people about, venting indexes, and they had to check what the venting index was, but people are always just going to get around it and say like, oh, I didn't know, or I misinterpreted. And to have something that is unnecessary if we do have a chipping or a pickup program in place, something that is unnecessary and so impactful to the people directly around you in your neighborhood, I think it's kind of an easy, it's a win you know, people complain, but in terms of the health of everybody involved in backyard burning, it's, yeah, it's a win-win.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. Kevin.
Well, it's hard to follow those comments. Totally agree with Larry and Tracy. I've done the same thing. I walked around my neighborhood and actually took pictures of people burning, I don't know what, and the major smoke that was evolved from it. The other thing I noticed was just the folks that are still burning leaves in just my neighborhood. Every fall, they just seem to want to do that. And I talked to one guy and he says, well, but I've always done it. So I guess it just goes back to this wonderful theme of education and awareness. Perhaps we can change some attitudes there. As for the land clearing, I think honestly, that's some really good work doing there. The one observation I have is I've noticed on the hill just over sort of down towards Royston and stuff, there's been burning going on there, maybe developers but there's been a lot of burning there that I don't think is associated with any lumber companies. And I don't know if there's anything we can do about that as part of our scope. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And Karen.
Hi there. No additional comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Diane.
Yeah, I think just as I reiterated before, education on what people are burning, and especially in rural areas. I think that there is a lot of unnecessary burning, and I think that we really should be cracking down on what people are burning. Doesn't help that recycling depots are closing left, right, and center for people to get rid of. That's a huge thing out here. So, people who don't want to actually drive out to the dump are instead burning a lot. And that's just unfortunate. That's it.
Okay. Thanks, Diane. Jamie.
Yeah, I live in Comox and I live right down near Knight Road, where it's no longer considered downtown Comox, where it seems like a lot of people around there will burn whatever you want. I grew up on a small farm back east, and so I do know about how we didn't have residential garbage out there, so we had to find ways. And PEI brought in wood chipping and composting way back in the 90s when I was a teenager, really trying to stay ahead of the curve. And so it does, I do see the advantages of having some residential outdoor burning in areas not downtown, but where I live in Comox near the fire hall, on a good windy day, you will get all the yard waste burning from Knight Road a couple kilometers away, coming right through Comox, and it's not pleasant.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Catherine.
Yeah, I really like what people have said about just the necessity of doing an outright ban in terms of saving our resources for bylaw enforcement or with the fire department enforcement, and making it a very, very clear thing. I think that's kind of one of the best ways you can educate people, is to be crystal clear about that this is just not necessary and therefore not acceptable.
Thanks, Catherine. James.
Yes, thank you. This was the group that I was part of, and we had some really good fulsome discussions on it. Some of the key points that I want to make clear and provide this added emphasis to is currently the fire departments, and that's my world, as I'm the manager of fire services for the CBRD. So the fire department focus is currently on fire safety. So that's everything that we do with regards to backyard burns or outdoor burns revolves around safety. We have permitting systems within the regional district, and they are to regulate what is currently an allowable use. That is the backyard burning. So what I want to make perfectly clear is that if it becomes a banned event where backyard burning is no longer an allowable use, that the fire department is not the agency that should be doing the enforcement, because our focus is safety, fire safety. The other aspect to that is that the fire departments are volunteers. So it's not really, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to ask them to enforce backyard burning for air quality purposes. The other aspect that I want to make clear is that there are other jurisdictions other than the CVRD. Yes, the regional district encompasses geographically a large area, but within that area are improvement districts, and those are authorities having jurisdiction over fire. And so when we talk about doing a bylaw review, it's not just regional district, it's regional district and the myriad of improvement districts. And that's why I said during our working group that what we need is a holistic view of all bylaws and all of them. And then you need to get buy-in from these other authorities having jurisdiction as well. It's bigger than just the CVRD. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, James. There's actually a question, so maybe I'll put it to you. Who enforced burning during the COVID ban last year?
That COVID ban was through the Emergency Operations Center. And what all of the fire departments were doing was saying that to manage their resources, meaning they didn't want to have their firefighters out in the public exposed to the COVID virus, all the departments through the authority of the Emergency Operations Center banned all burning.
There's a little more to it than that as well. So the prohibition order for no burning in the spring of last year was issued by MOE, and this is probably something Tara could speak to a little bit better than I, but they were the ones who issued it. And the primary was at that point in time, we knew that COVID was respiratory, and we didn't want to be doing anything that contributed to that potentially. Tarek, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Oh, that's right, Pete. It was for health reasons. During COVID times, it was a clear link between smoke, poor air quality, and health effects, aggravating health effects from COVID illness. So that's why the order was issued to ban any burning so that it doesn't aggravate existing illnesses due to COVID.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
I will continue on. Janelle.
Yeah, hi. Well, I'd like to echo what people were saying about, it's much easier to enforce an outright eliminated ban. I mean, I hear in my role a lot of complaints too about not just yard waste burning, but what people are putting on their piles from garbage and stuff that shouldn't be burned in the first place. But you can't enforce that. It's either burn or don't burn. So it'd be much better for everybody's health, enjoyment of their own property, even if you put health aside. And the climate change lens that Megan referred to. It's just a waste of carbon going up into the air for no reason, very little benefit other than convenience of not having to take it to the dump or get it chipped. So in terms of we haven't talked really about the open burning aspect of it, the larger fires. And the title of the slide was sort of, outside of residential neighborhoods. Not sure how that is defined. Maybe someone can speak to that. But particularly the land clearing burning that tends to be wetter and bigger and closer to residential. If there's like a land cleared in the city of Courtenay, the developer has to chip it or take it to the dump or get rid of it, and they do. But just like, just outside of the city of Courtenay, they can burn it within the new, restrictions, but they still can burn it. And Union Bay a few years ago was a horrible example of the amount of dark black smoke, not in a residential area, but in a residential area, kind of broader area. So I guess the definition of that, but it's the same thing. We have a high sensitive smoke zone near populated areas. It still allows burning. It could be also changed. So the provincial government recently changed their regulations, but they're still allow burning close to people or fires, just more restrictive.
Great, thank you, Janelle. And Megan.
So 2 comments. The first one was around that idea of semi-rural residential burning or backyard burning, and just a comment of how effective, at least anecdotally, how effective the change to unlimited organics pickup in the Village of Cumberland has been in the behavior patterns within the Village of Cumberland. We have other challenges, but that one was a dramatic shift. So awareness of the, which Alana posted about the alternative approval process underway right now for organics pickup in the rural area. I just think it was a real paradigm shifter. I know I'm still trying to bring my mom along, who will do a bunch of yard work, and then in her mind, she would have a fun. And we send them out to the street, and you know, she's a progressive, but she even needs a little bit of a reminder there. But that culture shift is real and has happened, and I've watched it happen. I don't know if my internet is holding out here. I seem to be a little unstable. The other piece is the need for the development of alternative markets for timber waste for the private managed forest landowners. They have a particular mandate related to the business model, both Mosaic and Hancock, which has to do with the value of the asset on the landscape there, and obligations, as we know, related to safety and hazard abatement. And it's more than just let the market lead and start to provide some, the market will lead and there'll be some way to purchase some of these waste materials for other uses. It's that need to go that extra step with local government advocating to other levels around the proactive development of new markets to respond to environmental issues, because if we let the market lead, it takes too long. And that idea of intervention by regional or province in terms of how waste is managed on site, the opportunity for composting or hog fuel, and just this real awareness that there isn't another, market option. And if we wait for the market, we're going to be waiting a long time. So what's our role? What's our responsibility, given the context of the Private Managed Forest Lands Act, to come up with alternative ways to deal with waste material understanding, which means we need to understand the business model of those landowners. And then we need to be able to respond so that there's other options.
Thanks, Megan. And Ella.
Yeah, not much to add on my part at all. I think the working group covered that topic quite well. So thanks.
Thanks, Ella. Helen.
Yes, I also am in favor of a ban on open burning once again, for health reasons. I think that organics being burned, they should really be seen for what they are, which are resources. They're organics that could be used, in composting and such. And so I'm delighted to hear about programs such as composting, the wood chipping as possibilities of reusing that for giving it back to the earth instead of burning it. I'm really glad that the topic of air pollution and the way it exacerbates and renders people much more vulnerable to COVID-19 was underscored. From a health perspective, that's absolutely true. There's a great deal of evidence-based research, and I think that that's something to be mindful for, because this was one virus. It's not the end of what we'll see. And so again, tackling air pollution is ever so important. I was part of this group, and I really appreciate James's comment about a need for alternative enforcement if there's not an all right ban, and where would sources of funding come from? Would that be advocating at UBCN? But all in all, it does render it much easier to have a clear-cut ban on open burning. So thank you.
Thanks, Helen. And Nancy.
I think everybody has summed it up quite well, but I did definitely appreciate Megan's comments talking about that culture shift. Having it that it's not just you rake up the backyard and that's what you do is you set it alight. And it's really promising to see that the local governments are starting that wood chipping and the extra yard waste pickup activities, because those are small things that we can do, but I think in the long run, like when we look at the long game, that's where we're going to see some definite benefits.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And as we did for the wood stoves, I'll just open it up to the steering committee. Are there any additional comments or that anyone from the steering committee wanted to make, since you were not part of the the list of names that we went around?
I've got a couple. So on the backyard burning, I'm going to challenge the group here a little bit. So yes, easy black and white, ban it. But what I'm going to, that's easy to say, and this is to expand a little bit on what Helen just said. When you say that, perhaps you could consider, how are we going to pay for it? Because that is the real challenge here. It's easy to say, let's have a bylaw, but it's much more difficult to enforce it, right? So how are we going to pay for it? That's the important question, right? So that's where the minds need to be creative, and that's where the challenge is. In terms of non-compliance with backyard burning as it's occurring right now, like if somebody is putting non-organic material on their pile, like they're breaking the law. And I know that there's hesitancy amongst neighbors to, you know, take action on that. But that is just so far beyond the pale to be putting plastics or non-organic matter on your backyard pile. People need to, you know, move away from that. And if you have to push them by walking over, taking a picture and sending that picture to the Report All Poachers and Polluters hotline, you should be doing that, right? And explaining to them, you know, this is just not on anymore. So I don't know. I find that just a little crazy when people are doing garbage in their backyard burning. That's just a little bit too far. And just remember, when we talk about the burning part of it, the fire safety aspect of things here too, right? If that fuel is not abated in one way, shape, or form or another, it sits there and it is available should a wildfire occur, and it's going to lead to control difficulties, it's going to lead to spread, and it's going to lead to big time emissions in the summertime when people are outside. So just keep that balance in mind. That's it for me.
Thanks, Pete. Those additional points. Is there anybody else from the steering committee that wanted to make any comments on the open burning piece? Eric.
I'll just echo some of that. The bans can be partial or full. I mean, you can ban it based on time of year or type of conditions, but also full. I'm talking about backyard burning in particular. But you do want to make sure that there are feasible alternatives in place. So having a ban before you have the feasible alternative is likely not going to, it's going to create more problems and more headaches than it's worth. So I think you want to link those two together, make sure that you've got a wood chipping program, and the resources, as Pete and others have pointed out, are really important. The other thing I wanted to say was Megan and I seem to be on the same wavelength today, because she made another really good point about value-added products. And if you look around the world in other parts, like in Europe and even parts of Eastern Canada, there are bioprocessing alternatives or means of taking some of that biomass and converting it into chemical feedstock, whether that's alternative fuels or alternative materials. And feedstocks for completely unrelated processes. And so I do think that being somewhat proactive in supporting, even if it's only just on paper, but drawing some attention to that bioprocessing possibility as another revenue stream, as another alternative to just burning that carbon. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other steering committee comments?
I just want to thank the committees and then this group too for this really thoughtful discussion. Man, like you've really stepped up the game on this work through the work of these committees and then the reflection that you're doing now. So I'm really, really thankful to each of you for doing that. The comment that I wanted to make, it's sort of along the same vein as people are saying, okay, you know, there's a cost to enforcement. I'm just gonna, in my heart of hearts, I'm a rural planner, and I just want to say that there's a jurisdiction question that we're facing here. We don't have jurisdiction at local government level right across our region. So part of our lay of the land assessment is going to help out understand where we have jurisdiction, and I think that will add another dimension to this conversation. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Alana. Helen, do you have a question further to what we've been discussing?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to add about the reporting to the RAP line. I had that experience where I saw people burning plastic in their backyard, took a photograph, phoned in, reported, even gave the venting index that day, and never got a call back. And that, I know my experience is not unique. I've heard from other people that they've had similar experiences. So I don't know quite, you know, how it works, or I was surprised not even to get a call back. So just want to share that.
Thanks, Helen. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Tarek, but do you have anything that from Ministry of Environment, how that works?
It's not the first time I heard this. But, in general, I've been told it's down to resources. Sometimes there's happen to be resources for the conservation officers to respond. Sometimes, unfortunately, there's not. But if you happen to have any photos, I would recommend there's an email link or there's a web link. You can upload a photo, you can document the complaint, and then it's on record for future follow-up. So perhaps, yeah, I'd advise anyone to use the web link, which I can provide right away. So it's more efficient, but unfortunately, it's down to resources, Helen. There's no promise all the time. That's as much as we would like to see that happen, but
I actually am quite sure, this was last summer, that my husband actually emailed it as well, the photographs. So.
The challenge with the RAP line is they need a very specific address. So if you're looking at, up in the hill and it's bad venting and nobody should burning, unless you have a street address or GPS coordinates, they won't go out and enforce it. So that's part of the issue. So it'd be great if they could have a drone so they could just find it and go do it, but it puts a lot of onus on. And my partner has gone out in his car to find a bad burn, and we have to phone in. So it's not an easy thing to do for sure.
Okay, thanks. Those are great comments to bring back to Working Group 3 for the next meeting to think about what role the CVRD, what this airshed protection strategy could play in helping to address that. Great. Well, echoing what Alana said, this has been a really fabulous round of input, and really appreciate everyone putting together all those thoughtful ideas and comments. And what we'd like to do now is take another very brief break, and then we'd like to come back. One of the themes that we've heard across both the wood stove and the open burning piece is around education. And so we would like to just have an opportunity to do a bit of brainstorming and discussion around that education piece as a group before we tie up for today. And so I want to put that thought into your head. We'll take a few minutes break while we just get our screen set up, and then we'll come back to have that discussion.
At what time?
Let's take 5 minutes. So 2:46. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for rejoining us so quickly. This will help us just keep on moving through everything that we want to accomplish today. And so what I've got on the screen in front of us is the draft goal around education. So education has come up in each of the working groups. So it is something that is being identified and worked on in each of the working groups. But we do have this separate goal area that is intended to be sort of a place to think about and to strategize around the education piece. So we wanted to have an opportunity for everyone to give us some initial thoughts on both what the goal statement says and also some initial ideas around what we can do to support this goal. And so currently I'll just read it out. It's up on the screen. We've got educate and involve the community in understanding and reducing the impacts of air pollution. And we've got 3 preliminary sub-goals. Which are first to facilitate a better understanding of the connection between air quality and health. Second, to support knowledge transfer through public events as a venue. And third is to support community engagement and links to educational opportunities. So interested in your thoughts on this, the preliminary sub-goals in particular, as well as any ideas on that we can bring back both to the working groups and back to the steering committee to start to formulate this education piece a little further as we move forward. So we'll use the same format where everybody has an opportunity to speak. And this time Dana is going to call out names, and I think she will also include the steering committee members. So heads up that everyone's going to get called on for this one. Great. So Dana, do you want to give us the, and I'll take notes on the screen as people are speaking.
Great. Thanks, Cariat. I'm actually going to do the round the opposite direction than we went last time. So we will, and then I'll do the steering committee afterwards, just so everyone knows. So we'll start with Nancy.
I'm frantically jotting down some notes, so.
Yeah, it was a quick, did it.
So yeah, definitely education was something that we talked a lot about in our working group, and not surprising to see it span across the other groups as well. So just a couple thoughts that I had as it comes to preparing materials is, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of like several different local governments. So being able to create a resource that's sort of like plug and play so that it can be logoed under that local government, but it be the consistent messaging and imagery. So having those resources already ready to go, I think would be really helpful. As well as looking at, you know, we have a lot of different backgrounds sitting at the table here, and being able to create resources that speak to those different concerns. So obviously, you know, I come from a background of health. And so when I look at these things, it's all as it relates to health, but I definitely appreciate Pete's comments about how it relates to the risk of forest fires, which then relates back to health. So, you know, being able to create resources that speak to all these different facets and tapping into these different organizations. I mean, obviously Island Health does have a media presence, like, you know, we have our social media accounts, and being able to create some of those bite-sized pieces of information and education as it pertains to sort of what is happening in the community at the time makes it easier for us to take that up the chain through communications and then just have that launched through our social media outlets. So those were just the couple thoughts that I jotted down right off the hop.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Those seem to be well thought out thoughts. So that's great. And I will take on the role of timekeeper now. So I will be keeping everyone to 90 seconds again and letting you know if we're close to that. So Helen, you are next.
Thank you. I certainly can see our group as nurses, we're very highly trusted health professionals, and having an active, we can have an active role in this education piece because of the health impacts. And I particularly want to underscore the importance for us to reach out to our marginalized population. I worked a decade with homeless population here in the Comox Valley. And when there were forest fires, for instance, and they're out sleeping in tents, they're deeply affected because often they have underlying chronic health conditions. And so I think that having a way in our education to reach out to other populations, such as our homeless population, but also those who are really susceptible to respiratory illnesses, such as our elderly population, who often, you know, if there's forest fires on, they stay indoors, et cetera. That's a big impact on their health, mental health as well. So elderly population, the very young who are vulnerable, pregnant women, these populations that somewhere in our education piece that they not be forgotten. So yeah, and that's my input for now.
Great. Thanks so much, Helen. And over to you, Ella.
I have nothing to add right at the moment. Here, so think about it a little longer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ella. Over to you, Megan. And that was Megan or Megan. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I think Megan said that she was stepping away for a bit.
Okay,
I
thanks,
saw that in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay, so let's move on and we can circle back to Megan. So Janelle.
Hi. Well, I mean, overall, I think it's a good goal. It's kind of got a lot under it. So I support the intent. I mean, the 3A, B, and C, I think there's some issues with those just in the way they're wording. 3A, what's facilitate? I think, the goal should be much clearer, is just to build a better understanding would be better than facilitate, because that's pretty wishy-washy. 3B, support knowledge transfer through public events. That's now moving from something kind of broad to something very specific. And my background, by the way, is I am a communications consultant. So I would be happy to provide more feedback later on through this, but public events is just a very narrow tool. That's just one tool to use to promote the increased awareness. And it doesn't really say what kind of knowledge transfer you're talking about. And then 3C is, it's just vague. I don't understand what it is actually trying to say. Support community engagement in what? And links to educational opportunities in, it's just, I think these could be much clearer about what you're doing under each one. But leave the very specifics about whether they use social media, public events, radio interviews, there's the tools are more specific. So there's a mix there. I think there needs to be some wordsmithing to make it really clear about what you're trying to do. But I think the biggest one is air quality and health. And so that maybe even should be part of the goal. Because there's two things. One is understanding it and one is reducing it. Maybe actually you should separate those, because it's one thing to build public awareness, but then reducing air pollution is you're then targeting a really different audience. You're targeting the people who are actively polluting. So that might be another thing, is to separate those into two.
Thanks so much, Janelle. And it sounds like you'll have lots more expertise to offer via email and as this conversation continues. So over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what can we do to support the goals? Through our working group, one of the things that did float, and it's been discussed here as well, is that chipper program. And so the chipper program, where where we can turn that resource, and somebody earlier today called it a resource, and I thought that's a very good way to capture that. That yard waste is actually a resource, and if there was a way that we could provide through the education aspect, provide a carrot. That is, if we could do an exchange program, and we talked about that earlier, is where if you give us the yard waste for chipping, and I'll give you a bag of Skyrocket soil medium, and so it becomes a quid pro quo more than anything, and that'll bring them on. And while we have their attention, and while we're making that discussion, that piece, we provide them with the education, the background, the rationale behind it. And then they become part of the team, as opposed to trying to provide them with the education that says the smoke is bad for you, so on and so forth. You may end up with more resistance. Let's pull them in and have them as part of the team.
It's great, James. You were right on time. I will move to Catherine.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with the public events in 3B as being too narrow a scope, and something that I think we've tried to do, or I've heard that there's been some and it's hard to reach the right audiences, right? And I really commend Jamie in targeting the audience of the people who come into his store. But I think there's a lot of really interesting ways that we can to reach people, and that's part of the education. So to support the goal, I actually think having the wood appliances be registered is a great way for us to find out where they are and who our audience is and who we need to be communicating with in terms of the burning. But I really appreciate what Janelle said, is there's two types of education, and the education around health, I think, is the biggest part that really isn't really well understood. I think there's an understanding that we have poor air quality in the Comox Valley, but I think there is a real lack in understanding how that impacts our health. So one really neat idea that our group came up with was, well, we didn't come up with it, other people do it in lots of different places, but no burning days. And we talked a lot about how weather is talked about in common conversations on the radio. We'll have a UV index listed. I'm just talking, just give me 1 minute. Okay, sorry, I have to get my baby. Sorry, I sent you a text and said, can you just wait?
I know, but I can't.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
Catherine, mute. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, can I keep going?
Yes, you get an extra 30 seconds or longer for that baby. Go.
Okay, anyway, so yeah, so we talked about, wouldn't it be great if we instigated no burning days, then that would lead to the conversation. Okay, this is the UV rating, this is the weather, and this is the air quality index in our town right now, and so you can't burn, and just how that could start that public conversation about what the air quality is. Also, like we mentioned before, the visibility bylaw, and having it something that anybody can measure, like, oh, okay, the plume of smoke has lasted for this long at this distance, we can still see it. That is an indicator that this is not dry wood being burned. So if we instigate a bylaw like that, where it allows people to be knowledgeable about what the plume should look like, it's another way we can educate people. And one thing that really impacted me was, I think it's in the Bay Area, you actually have to have a disclosure statement signed when you sell a house with a wood stove or rent a house to somebody with a wood stove, saying that the new tenant or the new owner understands the health impacts of a wood stove. And I thought that was just a really great way to make sure that education is getting to the right people. Okay, sorry about that.
No, thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you so much for this guest appearance of your adorable baby. Okay, over to Jamie.
One of the things we try to do here is definitely educate our customers. I've been at Chimney Sweep for almost 20 years, and when I first started out, the mentality has been rapidly changing here in the Valley. People are starting to recognize that we do have a big issue here, and people, quite a few of our customers do think they're doing a great job when we point out that the wood they're burning is unseasoned, that their state-of-the-art stove is actually 25 years old and it's no longer good. We try really hard, not just to make an upsell, but to educate the people, because we live here. I've got 4 kids. We play here. We've got all kinds of different issues too as well. I'm from the East Coast, but I'm staying here. I'm not going anywhere, and I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we try really hard to educate people, and I go back to school every year to be a certified inspector. And one of the things we've been really focused on is basically educating people when to burn, what to burn, and how to burn. And if people can't follow those guidelines, maybe telling them they shouldn't be able to burn.
Thanks, Jamie. And Diane.
No, I think I'm good right now. Thanks. Educational.
Great. Thanks, Diane. Karen.
Agree with everything that's been said so far. I'm just wondering about, in terms of education, I mean, we're always with Community Health Network looking for ways to reach people, reach the community, because we're representing the community. So we partner with as many groups as possible, because there are tons of groups out in the Comox Valley, whether it be something like the Community Health Network or the Division of Family Practice or a knitters group or a lawn bowling group, doesn't really matter, but finding a way to potentially partner with a group or meet with a group that exists to help support the education, help to fan out the education, or at least educate that group. So trying to take advantage of linkages that already exist. There's lots of like-minded people in the valley and those who are sitting on the fence.
Thank you, Karen. Kevin?
Wow, so many good points. I had two kind of points, and it was about changing behavior, and some of these things that you brought up would fit into that. And one was this interesting concept of culture of tolerance. If something goes on, but everybody says, "Oh, it's just fine. We always do that. We've always done it that way," you know, and the behavior or whatever persist. And the second one was about an interesting concept where basically they said, if you have a social norm, people follow it. And so the concept was simply, if you have a changing social norm, even if you believe, and I'll use the wood concept here, say I'm a firm believer, I should be able to burn anytime I want, everything, as long as I behave. But if the social norm is, you know what, here's a bunch of information, here's a bunch of people that have stopped burning, right? Just to show the other people, and I'm not saying to everybody, this isn't an outright ban, but if you start showing stories or cases where people stop burning and why, they said that's a really big influencer on the social norm, going to the previous comment about folks on the fence. And I think that would be a really interesting little strategy to build into these things is the culture of tolerance. You got to point out that, well, maybe people aren't as tolerant as you thought. Maybe people are complaining or they don't like it. And the other one is about this shifting social norm to bring people along. So the last one I thought about, and probably about 2 seconds left, is there any thought about education in schools? Kids can be a really big motivator. You know, go into schools, show the kids, this is what's going on, this is the health problems, here's the things, here's how it affects you, your mom, your dad, your grandma. They take the message home. I've heard that it's a very powerful mechanism.
Great, thank you. Tracy?
So I'm always interested in finding ways to like connect with people, you know, sort of get the information in front of the people who maybe, you know, don't go to events, you know, talking about putting on community events or, you know, you only get a certain number of people. And I feel like sometimes you're speaking to an echo chamber. So I think about things like the boil water advisory signs that come up for Comox when they need to, you know, when the water is in poor shape, or speed limit signs, you know, reminding of people what their current speed is in areas that maybe have speed issues. And what about, you know, we're not going to solve this. We're not going to eradicate wood stoves in the next year or even 2 years or 3 years. So what about really putting that information in people's faces? You know, when we are having those days of really poor air quality in the winter or the spring, you know, directly related to wood stove burning. You know, can we put signs up there that are, you know, encouraging people's like, you know, don't send your kids to walk to school in the smoke. You know, we see those photos online of kids walking to school in Cumberland, or I think it's like Lake Trail area, basically walking through smoke. And I wonder if something like that, where we have this very clear, you know, the air quality index is this at this moment, please consider your actions, and not like actions about like, oh, you know, put out your wood stove, but consider changing your activity to avoid being outside. And maybe that might help to make people make that connection between what they are doing when they burn and the impact to the people who are actively, you know, outside living. But just sort of like immediate, like, whoa, I'm driving by and like, whoa, air quality is this bad. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you so much, Tracy. Over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I can contribute from an industrial point of view here, but I would just say, like, just make sure the public knows that industry is following best practices, and we are strictly regulated. And I've heard enough people say that, or with thoughts saying that we're just doing whatever the heck we want out here willy-nilly, but that's not the case. We are following some pretty stringent regulation and rules here. So yeah, I think that's all I got to add.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Larry? Are you with us, Larry? You might need to unmute.
Oh, is that better?
Yes, there we are.
Okay, sorry. Anyways, what Kevin mentioned about education in schools was the top of my list. And Tracy mentioned some really good points about putting signage up. Education, no matter whether it's revolved around open burning or whether it's wood stoves, I think is really the key to getting the public involved and on board. And just for a quick example, if there was an incident because of a fire spreading from open burning or something like that, the amount of cost and resources that it would take to deal with that, or for healthcare issues for somebody that's struggling with breathing problems, the cost of looking after that person or the cost of emergency resources going out for one incident or one person would cover easily a year or two worth of media, education, advertising to get the public more aware of what the consequences are of poor practices and what alternatives are to better practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And I will circle back to you, Megan, if you're there.
Yeah, I just wrote it too. It's okay. No, just to add in that it's interesting that we, that from local government, there's been this like reach out, this is from electeds as well, to the community for expertise and feedback, and we flow that back, and what comes out of that is a bunch of things that we need to do to educate the community. And I feel like we're creating too small a loop, and that there's another piece of this puzzle, which is we have a really open elected body right now who is on all kinds of levels really reaching out to the community for input and support, the community sector, local skills and expertise. And there's a democratizing of community process happening right now in the Valley that is unprecedented and very exciting. And I think that we would be doing this process at disadvantage by keeping the loop so small, which is we'll give you advice now on how to come back and educate us. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. But another piece is that piece that we talked about and that Pete raised from our group, which is we need to also equip our community leadership with the tools, the draft policies, and the angles, the regulatory angles that they can take to address broader air quality issues in the community, because airsheds know no municipal boundaries. So I feel like we're doing a bit of a disservice by keeping this loop keeping it as this like jurisdictional loop. I understand why we're doing that because we're in a local government process, but there's a missed opportunity here in our recommendations, which is the community is here to support local government and local electeds to be advocating for things that will make a difference for industry, that's going to make a difference for waste management, it's going to make a difference on climate change, like bigger picture solutions that are going to happen at the regulatory level. So I just hope that within the recommendations that we don't just keep that loop being government to public, to local government, to the public, but that we actually support and equip local electeds and local government to help make regulatory changes that are actually going to make a difference in the long game.
Okay, thank you so much. So we've done a round of the roundtable now, so I'm going to move to the steering committee. Janine, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, first I agree entirely with Megan. I think that equipping municipalities is definitely the right way to go. Speaking to the public education piece though, I would say really focusing on information that hasn't already been provided. There has been things that's been communicated over the years through the wood smoke reduction program. I think the public has heard some of those messages and there's still more work to be done. So things that they haven't heard, and although there is a focus on those health effects, I think we're assuming that people may hear or have an understanding of those health effects and immediately know what to do to make it better or to make it stop. And I'm not sure if that's the case. And so I think something that we could do from a public education perspective would be to focus on what we want them to do. So whether that is replacing a stove, burning better, managing their backyard waste, reporting unacceptable burning that they may witness, that sort of thing is where the change happens. The change happens in their behavior, not just in their broader understanding of the health effects. And then of course, just those communication strategies. So things like presenting the information at the time it's most relevant. So going into the fall, when we know people are going to be doing yard cleanup, that's a good opportunity. Or other times of year where people might want to have recreational burns, that sort of thing. So just making sure that our communication is timely and relevant, and we have a unified message across jurisdictions. So that includes local governments for sure, and all of the different regional authorities that we've talked about, but that might also include the fire department. That might also include teachers, nurses, those sort of practitioners that have already interfaced with the public and can communicate that message. And I think in that way, we can make our education more comprehensive. So we're not just relying on the same people attending an event or the same group of people interacting with us on social media.
Great. Thanks so much, Janine. Eric, do you have thoughts on education you'd like to share?
Sure. I'll start by stating the obvious. You know, education is not a one and done process, and it's not one dimensional. So everybody has, I think, emphasized that. I'm a big fan of ongoing engagement, and I think this can be done through in a variety of ways, whether it's an event series or whether it's social media and so on. But I'd also like to emphasize some of the things that have come up in the chat that I'm a strong believer of, and that's citizen science, and the ability to involve people in the process can do as much to engage them and educate them as well, even more for perhaps than the data itself. I love the idea of having air quality monitors at various schools and other publicly visible locations. You could have real-time air quality index displays at those locations. You know, there's a number of things that I think are enabled by some of the developments in the technology that allow us to do this. Now, there's caveats to this, which is that, you know, it doesn't give federally equivalent numbers. So there are issues around quality control and how we manage that data and that message. But I still think the value in the micro engagement is great. The last thing I'll point out is somebody mentioned that the audience should really needs to be on the polluters, but I actually think insofar as some of the solutions that are being proposed are legislative in nature, they do require a broader support from the electorate. So I do think there is a need for that, the education to be cast fairly wide, especially for support for legislative solutions. That's it for me.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Pete, do you have things to add?
Yeah, actually a couple of things. So we don't need to recreate the wheel here. There are other successful public health and prevention campaigns that have been initiated over the years, and some of those points have been brought up here. And you know, BC wildfire, I'm exposed to one that's part of our agency, and so I just want to emphasize a couple of points that have already been made, and we know that they work. School curriculum, it should be developed, and get them while they're young. And so if you can teach people when they're young, they'll carry that through the rest of their lives. What we found in wildfire, and we do it through our Fire Smart program and fire safety programs, we have different curriculums designed for, you know, grades 1 and 2, grades 3 and 4, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we teach them, they're receptive, they go home and they educate their parents. That's the way this works, because we're trying to reach people here who oftentimes won't be receptive to this message, right? You're not trying to convince the people who are already on board. It's the ones who are not receptive. So I can't overemphasize school curriculum should be developed, and it doesn't have to be, you know, it's a simple message really that can be delivered to these kids, and they can take it home. And what, you know, Kevin was saying about social norms, this is a way to start changing them. Tracy talked about signage. We have fire danger signs. You guys have seen them, low, medium, high, extreme, to notify the public what the fire danger is out there so that they're more cautious when they are out there on the landscape camping or doing whatever. The signs are also for industry, but the exact same thing could be done with air quality, as was mentioned by Tracy. radio advertisements are very effective, right? And, you know, when people are at work listening to the radio, wherever they may be in their car, there's no avoiding it. So local advertisement on radio stations is huge. That is another way of changing social norms. Even if they don't get it while they're hearing the message, they may even think it's stupid, but it's affecting their subconscious. It's dripping in slowly over time. And so it's a multi-pronged approach. And I'm looking forward to discussing this more with our group in terms of that toolkit and finding ways we can put things in there in terms of advocacy, linking local governments with provincial governments, so on and so forth. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Pete. Tarek.
Yeah, not much adds after all the excellent ideas here, but I would second Janelle's comments about making goals more focused. And particularly, I think around two big themes. One is the connection, education on the connection between air quality and health, and the other is education on best burning practices. If these can be two axes for the education, I think that'll be really useful to narrow it down. In terms of what you can do support, again, as Pete said, that's a really ongoing conversation. And again, we can look to other places, jurisdictions, and campaigns that are really successful in this regard. But if I can offer some ideas, one would be there are these events that, as I mentioned, which I mentioned before. There's excellent professionals, academics who have a long history in delivering the messages. But I hope you can find a way to reach out to the audiences, which I've seen in some of the working groups that are still really missing the point. There's still this big disconnect. And the fundamentals, well, I think we've passed it, but for some people we're not past it, the fundamental connections between air quality and health. So I hope we can find creative ways to reach those audiences. The other is around schools, which would be amazing. I'm not sure if it's happening, but we have something called Clean Air Day. It's in early June. It's still within the school season. Maybe it's something to be looked at, is maybe having big celebrations every year of Clean Air Day in schools with events, with displays. That's one idea. Also, something that's been mentioned is around the low-cost sensors and citizen science. If we have the Purple Air network and in the Comox Valley, I think that will provide a really excellent engagement and communication piece on par with other airsheds where we have these low-cost sensors. So this could be a real window there for awareness and education and outreach with citizen science as monitors. Just some ideas. Thanks, Dana.
Great. Thanks so much, Tarek. Daphne, would you like to offer any insights into education?
Thank you. I don't have much for input right now because I'm probably going to echo and repeat most of the great ideas and contributions that have come forward today. But I think one thing I was thinking of in the back of my head is that the education has been a dominant theme throughout all of the working groups. And I kept on thinking of the education piece in terms of the Comox Valley Regional District and what we've done in the past and the traditional methods, our traditional approach in disseminating this information. And I think even just from today's session, something that's come up in my mind is the innovation and the need for creativity that's been mentioned by so many different people in different ways. And also dissemination of information is just not through our tools that we have here at the CVRD, but just the diverse representation we have and how do we create alignment within this education and probably create a targeted approach for information dissemination, because different educational messages will appeal to different people. So that's just something I'm thinking of. And yeah, just thank you for all the great ideas today. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Daphne. Alana, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just quickly, I'm really happy to hear people talking about behavior change and systems change. I think this project is as much about building relationships as it is anything else. Really excited to hear enthusiasm for citizen science and the interest maybe in a data repository, a local, single point of contact, and that's something that maybe the CVRD can help play a role in. As far as education, I'm really keen, 20 years as a public sector planner, I'm really supportive of meeting people where they are and building, as Daphne's saying, multiple messages that don't assume a shared set of value, and certainly that don't come up from a place of moral high ground. I don't think I've ever seen that work in public outreach and education and adult education. So yeah, I think lots of great ideas here, really excited about the tone. And yeah, CVRD is really keen to support a lot of these great ideas, because I think there could be a real role for us to play in providing some of that linking or unifying role among the 4 local governments we have here in the Comox Valley, 5 with Comox Nation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alana, and everyone for providing your thoughts. Have I missed anyone? Just want to double check. Okay, I'll pass it over to you, Carrie-Ad, to go over some next steps.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's just in time, perfect timing. So we've just got a few minutes left to wrap up and talk about what the intention is going forward. And I don't have the slide up in front of me, but I'll speak to them and we'll distribute the slides following the meeting. And so what we've got planned now is each of the 3 working groups that were established will have listened to what everybody has put together or has offered today. And the plan is to meet again with each of those working groups, take all of the feedback that we heard today and continue to refine all of the strategies and actions that they've begun to develop. And so that meeting will happen, those meetings will happen in July. And then, oh, thanks. Thanks, Dana. And then following that, or actually at the same time as that, there will also be the steering committee will be meeting again to further develop the actions that come under the goal area 2. So they're acting as the working group for that goal area. And then all of those pieces will be drafted into some preliminary form of strategy, which we will then come back to the roundtable with for the fall. And so we have the next roundtable meeting is scheduled for September 23rd. And so in advance of that, we will bring back a report of here are all of the pieces that have been developed to date, and it will be just preliminary, but it will be built on the existing draft vision, goals, and guiding principles, as well as all the working group efforts and additional input from the steering committee that will bring us to a place where we're ready to see the picture of what we're pulling together for the strategy. And the intention is to get roundtable feedback on that in September, and then to move towards developing a public input and survey through the fall. And that will happen at the same time as I mentioned before, there is the CVRD Connect and additional information and education that's starting to go out publicly that will happen in parallel at the same time. So those are some an overview of the next steps and where we're headed. And just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for your time and contributions today. We've got tons of valuable input from everyone and really, really appreciate that. And I just wanted to check if Alana or Daphne, if you have any closing thing that you wanted to say from the CVRD. All good? All right.
Well, I think we were both pausing to let the other one speak, so I'll just jump in. I just again would like to thank everyone so very much for today's discussion. So much great thought went into this conversation. We really, really appreciate it. Daphne and I are going to take a stab at digging into some of the sort of question pieces that arose during the working committee meetings and try to get some answers around what we might be able to do, where some heavy lifting might be, where some low-hanging fruit could be, and report that back to the working committees just for a little bit further context. But thank you so much again. Daphne?
I think that's all. Thank you, Lana, and thank you everybody for taking the time to be part of this today.
Thanks so much. And Helen, I see you've got a question.
Just a quick question about what Alana describes as the lay of the land with all the jurisdictional bylaws and such. Will that be made available prior to our next working group meeting? Because that would be such a useful tool.
Sorry, working group? Probably not. Because I don't know if you've scheduled the working group meetings. They're next week, aren't they? Or the week after? Oh, I'll touch base with Dana and Carrie for sure. We'll get it out to this group as soon as we have it, and it'll be well before that September 23rd roundtable meeting. But I'll just firm up on dates with Dana and Carrie for those working group sessions. Sorry, Helen, can't be more definitive at this point.
Okay. Just thinking that how useful that would be, certainly for all the working groups moving forward to know what exists. And thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks, Helen, and thank you, everyone. And please stay cool and take it easy during the heat wave over the next few days, and look forward to reconnecting with all of you, either at the working groups or in a few months at the next roundtable. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.